Fragments of a single ancient text were found in more of the Qumran caves than almost any other book in that collection. 11 separate caves, multiple manuscript copies, written in Aramaic and Hebrew both. The year was 1947, and the shepherds who first crawled into those limestone caverns above the Dead Sea had no idea they were holding something that had been deliberately buried, deliberately preserved, for nearly 2,000 years. The question that crawled out of those caves alongside the scrolls was the one nobody could quite answer. Why would a community of devout Jewish scribes guard this particular book with such obsessive care, when the rest of the world had quietly decided it did not belong in Scripture at all? The book is the Book of Enoch, and Enoch himself is one of the strangest figures in all of the ancient world. He appears in the Bible for exactly 4 sentences. He lives 365 years, walks with God, and then nothing. The text does not say he died. It says, with almost jarring simplicity, that he was not, for God took him. That is it. No tomb, no burial, no mourning family. One moment he is here, the next he is somewhere else entirely, and across thousands of years, across dozens of cultures, across Jewish mysticism, early Christianity, the Ethiopian highlands, and the ancient libraries of Mesopotamia, people have been asking the same question ever since. Where did Enoch go, and what did he know before he left? Stick with me, because the answer, or rather, the tangle of answers, is one of the most fascinating rabbit holes in ancient religious history. We are going to look at who Enoch was in the oldest texts, what the Book of Enoch actually says, how it shaped both Jewish thought and early Christianity, why it was eventually locked out of the biblical canon, and what echoes of his story appear in civilizations that had no contact with Israel. Every layer you peel back gets stranger. That is a promise. Start at the beginning, the genealogical chapter in Genesis that lists the great pre-flood patriarchs. It reads like a roll call of extraordinary lifespans. Adam lived 930 years. Methuselah, famously, hit 969. Almost every name in that list ends with the same refrain, and he died. Then you reach the 7th entry in the line from Adam, Enoch. He lives for 365 years, noticeably shorter than the others, and scholars have long noted that 365 mirrors the number of days in a solar year, which may not be coincidental. And then, instead of the usual formula, the text shifts. It says, Enoch walked with God, a phrase used nowhere else in that passage. And then it says, God took him. The Hebrew word used there, lakach, means to take or to carry away. The same word used when Elijah ascends in his whirlwind. Enoch did not die in any ordinary sense. He was removed from the world while still alive. For ancient readers, that single difference was enormous. In a tradition that carefully tracked the death of every patriarch, the absence of a death notice was not an oversight. It was a statement, and it triggered centuries of speculation about what Enoch had done, what he had seen, and what it meant that God would take a human being directly into the divine presence, rather than letting him pass through the ordinary gate of death. Now here is where the story gets much richer, because outside the 4 sentences in Genesis, there is an entire body of ancient literature built around Enoch, and it was almost certainly circulating long before Genesis reached its final written form. The oldest sections of what we call the Book of Enoch, a sprawling and visionary composite text, are thought by many scholars to date to somewhere around the 3rd or 4th century before the Common Era, though some of the traditions embedded in it may be considerably older. It is not one book. It is more like 5 books woven together, each with its own focus, its own tone, and its own set of astonishing claims. The first and most famous section describes Enoch's vision of the Watchers. In the tradition preserved in the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are a class of angelic beings, 200 of them, by the account given, who were assigned to observe the earth and its people. And they did something they were not supposed to do. They saw the daughters of men, and they wanted them. They made a pact with one another on a mountain called Hermon, and they descended to earth and had children with human women. The offspring of those unions are the Nephilim, the giants, mentioned so cryptically in Genesis chapter 6, just before the flood narrative begins. The Book of Enoch tells you exactly what Genesis only hints at: who the fathers were, what their names were, what forbidden knowledge they taught to humanity. Because the Watchers did not come empty-handed. According to this tradition, they brought with them the secrets of metallurgy, of weapon-making, of cosmetics and adornment, of astrology and sorcery. One of their leaders, a figure named Azazel, taught men how to make swords and shields. Another taught the reading of celestial signs. The text is deeply ambivalent about all of this. These are not gifts given in love. They are corruption disguised as knowledge. The world fills with violence. The cries of humanity reach heaven, and God responds by sending 4 archangels: Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, each with a specific task: bind the Watchers, cleanse the earth, and prepare for what is coming. And Enoch is caught right in the middle of all of this. The Watchers, knowing judgment is coming, ask Enoch, the righteous one, the scribe, the man who walks between the human and the divine, to intercede for them before the throne of God. He agrees to deliver their petition. He is taken up into heaven in a vision, carried through layers of fire and crystal and light, and brought before a presence so overwhelming he falls on his face and cannot move. And the answer he carries back to the Watchers is not what they hoped for. There is no mercy for those who abandon their station. The judgment will stand. What makes this fascinating, from a literary and theological standpoint, is how much weight the Enoch tradition places on his role as a scribe. He is not just a witness, he is a recorder. God instructs him to write everything down: the movements of the stars, the laws governing the calendar, the names and functions of every angel, the fate of the righteous and the wicked, the architecture of heaven itself. In some versions of the tradition, Enoch writes 366 books during his time in the celestial realm. He becomes the keeper of cosmic knowledge, the original librarian of the universe, you might say. And that is only slightly a joke. This scribal role connects Enoch to something older and wider than the Hebrew tradition. Scholars who study ancient Mesopotamia, the civilization that flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers long before Israel existed, have noticed a striking parallel. In the Sumerian and Babylonian king lists, there is a figure named Enmedaranki, the 7th king before the Great Flood, just as Enoch is the 7th patriarch before the flood in Genesis. Medaranki is described as a man who was taken up to the assembly of the gods, who received divine tablets containing the secrets of heaven and earth, and who was sent back to teach his knowledge to humanity. He is associated with divination, with the reading of cosmic signs, and with a special closeness to the sun god. The parallels are close enough that many scholars believe Enoch and Enmedaranki may share a common ancestry in the ancient Near Eastern imagination, the idea of a pre-flood wise man, uniquely elevated, who bridges the human and the divine. Whether that means borrowing, parallel development, or something deeper is a question no one has fully settled. Now, if you have spent any time with early Christian writings, you may have noticed something unexpected. The New Testament quotes the Book of Enoch. The letter of Jude, which is a canonical book accepted by virtually every Christian tradition, contains a direct quotation attributed to Enoch, the 7th from Adam. The passage describes Enoch prophesying about divine judgment coming against the ungodly. Jude treats this not as legend, but as genuine prophecy. The early church fathers were well aware of the Book of Enoch. Some embraced it enthusiastically. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, argued it should be treated as scripture. Others were more cautious. And over time, as the canon of the Old Testament was formalized, the Book of Enoch was left outside. The reasons are worth understanding. Part of it was that the book's content, angels mating with humans, a cosmic rebellion before the flood, felt too speculative, too mythological, too prone to misuse. Some theologians worried that the detailed angelology it contained gave too much power and personality to beings who should remain subordinate to God. There were also concerns about its date of composition. It was clearly not ancient in the way Moses or the Psalms were ancient. It was left out not because anyone forgot it, but because a deliberate decision was made that it sat outside the boundaries of accepted teaching, except in one place. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, never dropped the Book of Enoch. They have treated it as canonical scripture for well over 1,000 years, and it is through the Ethiopian tradition that the complete text survived into the modern era. When a Scottish traveller named James Bruce brought 3 manuscript copies back from Ethiopia in the late 18th century, European scholars encountered the full Book of Enoch for essentially the first time in many centuries. The text that the Western Church had moved on from had been quietly preserved in the highlands of East Africa the whole time. I find that quietly wonderful. And then came Qumran. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found beginning in 1947, and scholars began the long work of identifying and translating the fragments, they discovered that the community who had gathered there, likely the Essenes, a strict Jewish sect living in the desert centuries before the Common Era, had preserved copies of the Book of Enoch as carefully as they had preserved the Torah itself. The Aramaic fragments found there represent some of the oldest physical manuscripts of the Enochic material we have. This community clearly considered it sacred. They read it, copied it, and hid it. That tells you something about how seriously parts of the ancient Jewish world took this tradition, even when the mainstream tradition eventually moved past it. Before I go any further, if you have been exploring ancient mysteries alongside me for a while, and you have not subscribed yet, now is a genuinely good time. This channel is built for people who love exactly this kind of story, the ones that start in a footnote and open into something vast. Hit subscribe and stay with us. Now, there is one more dimension of the Enoch story that takes things into even stranger territory, and it comes from the tradition of Jewish mysticism known as Merkabah, or Hechalot literature, texts concerned with heavenly palaces, divine thrones, and the ascent of the soul. In these traditions, Enoch does not simply visit heaven and return. He is transformed. He becomes an angel. Specifically, he becomes the archangel Metatron, described as the highest of all angels, the one who sits closest to the divine throne, the prince of the heavenly host. In some texts, Metatron is called the Lesser Yuach, a title that made certain later Jewish authorities deeply uncomfortable, for obvious reasons. The transformation described in these texts is extraordinary. Enoch's human flesh is remade into fire, and his human knowledge is expanded into cosmic understanding. He is given a robe, a crown, and a throne. He becomes the heavenly scribe in full, the keeper of all records, past and future. Whether you read this as theology, as metaphor, as mystical poetry, or as something stranger still, it represents one of the most dramatic transformations of a human figure in the entire ancient religious imagination. The man who walked with God did not just visit. According to this tradition, he became part of the divine structure itself. So where does all of this leave us? Here is what we can say with confidence. Enoch is a genuinely ancient figure whose brief appearance in Genesis clearly reflects traditions that were much older and much richer than those 4 sentences suggest. The Book of Enoch, whatever its ultimate origins, was widely read, carefully preserved, and deeply influential across Jewish and early Christian communities. Its ideas about angels, about cosmic judgment, about forbidden knowledge, and about the fate of the righteous shaped the religious imagination of the ancient world in ways that echoed forward into texts that did make it into the Bible. The Nephilim, the flood, the moral geography of heaven and earth. Much of what early readers assumed was background color in Genesis was explained and elaborated in Enoch, and the core mystery remains exactly where it has always been. A man lived, walked with God, and was not. No death, no explanation, no grave marker on any ancient hill. I think the reason Enoch has never stopped capturing the imagination is precisely because of that absence. History is full of remarkable people who lived remarkable lives and died. What we do with Enoch is different. He represents the possibility, the wild, persistent, unkillable human hope that the boundary between the mortal world and whatever lies beyond it is not absolute, that in some rare and extraordinary case, it can simply be stepped across. Whether that feels to you like theology, like mythology, like ancient poetry reaching for something it cannot quite name, or like a memory of something that actually happened, I genuinely would not presume to tell you. The ancient world itself could not agree, and neither can we. What I will tell you is this. The next time you read those 4 lines in Genesis and hit the words "God took him," you are not just reading a genealogy. You are standing at the edge of one of the deepest wells in ancient thought, and the deeper you drop a stone into it, the longer you wait to hear it land. I want to know what you think. Do you believe Enoch's story preserves a genuine ancient tradition about a real figure, someone whose unusual life gave rise to all of this? Or is this the human imagination doing what it does best, spinning wonder out of a gap in the record? Leave your thought in the comments. I read them, and this community always brings perspectives I have not considered. If you want to keep pulling on this thread, you might enjoy my video on what happened to the prophet Elijah, another figure who left the earth without dying, in the conventional sense, carried off in a chariot of fire. That one has its own extraordinary surprises. It is right here on the channel. And if this kind of story is why you show up, the ones that live in the margins of ancient texts and refuse to stay quiet, then subscribe. There is always another door worth opening. I will see you in the next one.